They began with a question not about profit, but about purpose. What if every piece of knowledge ever created could be found by anyone anywhere in seconds? It sounded idealistic, impossible, almost naive. But that question would ignite a revolution that reshaped how humanity thinks, learns, and remembers. Two young minds, Larry Page and Sergey Brin, set out not to build a company, but to decode the chaos of the internet. In the late 1990s, the web was an untamed wilderness. Millions of pages shouted for attention, each link a fragment of human curiosity lost in noise. Finding truth online felt like searching for a single star in a sky of static. And then came their idea, a system that could rank importance not by noise, but by connection, a logic that mimicked trust itself. In their hands, search became more than a tool. It became a mirror of human intention. They didn't invent curiosity. They gave it direction. But every act of order carries a shadow of control. As the algorithm learned to sort knowledge, it also learned to shape it. What we saw became what we believed. What we searched became who we were. The more people trusted the machine, the more the machine defined their trust. The paradox was born in trying to organize the world's information. They began to organize the world's thinking. Larry and Sergey didn't set out to rule the internet. They only wanted to make it understandable. Yet, in teaching humanity how to find everything, they became the unseen architects of what we choose to see. They gave us access to all answers, but also the illusion that answers are enough. And so begins the story of two visionaries and the search that changed everything. Before the billions of searches, before the empire of data and algorithms, there were simply two boys, one in the suburbs of Michigan, one in the shadow of Moscow, both raised in families that believed curiosity was a duty, not a distraction. Larry Page grew up surrounded by computers his father built for research, his mother teaching programming before the world knew what coding meant. The hum of machines was the sound of home. Books lined the walls, ideas filled the air. For Larry, innovation wasn't rebellion. It was inheritance. Thousands of miles away, Sergey Brin was learning to see the world through both awe and defiance. His parents, Jewish academics in the Soviet Union, taught him that knowledge was freedom, that information could outlive oppression. When the family fled to America, he carried with him not only a new passport, but a quiet conviction systems could be changed if you understood how they worked. Logic was his shield. Curiosity, his compass. They were different by temperament. Larry introspective and precise. Sergey playful and bold. But they shared the same obsession, understanding how complex systems connect. They didn't just want answers. They wanted to know how answers were born. At Stanford, destiny looked ordinary. Two graduate students crossing paths in a doctoral program about search engines, a niche field no one outside academia cared about. Yet from the moment they argued about algorithms on that first walk across campus, something clicked. It wasn't friendship at first. It was friction, the kind that creates fire. Both stubborn, both convinced they were right, both unwilling to stop asking why. The lab became their universe. Whiteboards crowded with equations, cables snaking across the floor, discarded pizza boxes beside towers of servers. The nights blurred into mornings as they tested, failed, rebuilt. Larry obsessed over ranking results by importance. Sergey chased patterns in human behavior hidden behind data. Between them, a new language formed, half mathematics, half intuition, a code for understanding how the web could mirror the mind itself. They weren't dreaming of money or fame. They were trying to make sense of infinity, to tame chaos with clarity. Their professors saw potential. Their peers saw eccentricity. But they didn't care. To them, the web wasn't just an invention. It was evolution. And if they could teach a machine to think like the human brain, maybe they could help humanity understand itself. They failed countless times. The servers overheated. The funding ran out. The code broke in ways they couldn't explain. But curiosity is a kind of faith, the refusal to stop seeking even when you don't yet know what you're looking for. In that dim Stanford lab beneath the hum of old computers, two minds from opposite sides of the world were weaving the same idea into being. That connection between pages, between people, between ideas, was the key to truth. And somewhere between logic and wonder, between a question and its answer, they would discover the spark that would soon set the world ablaze. Because for Larry Page and Sergey Brin, curiosity wasn't just a trait, it was destiny. In 1996, inside a cluttered Stanford dorm room filled with wires, soda cans, and the restless hum of servers, two doctoral students stared at a screen that held more than just data, it held possibility. Larry Page and Sergey Brin were not searching for money or fame. They were searching for structure inside chaos. The web was growing faster than anyone could comprehend, a wild garden of pages and links without a map. To most, it looked like noise. To them, it looked like a pattern waiting to be revealed. Larry's idea was deceptively simple. What if every link from one page to another could act like a vote of confidence? What if the web could determine its own hierarchy democratically, mathematically, organically? Together they called their experiment Backrub, a strange name for a project destined to redefine human knowledge. What began as a research paper became the seed of something far greater, a machine capable of measuring the pulse of relevance itself. They worked day and night, driven by a quiet mania. When the server overheated, they borrowed fans from the dorm. When the power failed, they rebuilt. Every crash was a challenge. Every line of code, a leap toward clarity. Between them grew a rhythm, Larry's precision and Sergey's intuition, merging into a single creative current. They weren't just building a program. They were birthing an organism that could think in links, reason in logic, and learn from the structure of the web itself. The result was PageRank, an algorithm that changed everything. It didn't search by counting words, but by understanding relationships. It read the web like a mind reads meaning, not what was said, but what was connected. Suddenly, information stopped being scattered. It became navigable, intelligent, almost human. When they presented their findings, professors were impressed but confused. Investors didn't understand the point. The two refused to compromise. They weren't building for today's internet. They were building for tomorrow's civilization. When they needed a name, they chose Google, a playful twist on Google. The number 1 followed by 100 zeros. Infinite possibilities. Infinite questions. They didn't yet realize it, but they had just rewritten how the world would think. Search was no longer a tool. It was a mirror reflecting back not just what humanity wanted to know, but who humanity was. Every query became a confession. Every click a breadcrumb of desire. Google didn't just organize the web. It began to map the collective mind. In that cramped room at Stanford, two young dreamers gave birth to a silent revolution. They had turned information into light, and the world would never again live in the dark. They didn't invent knowledge. They made it findable. And as the first sparks of Google spread beyond the campus, one truth became clear: this was not the story of a company. It was the beginning of a new species, a digital consciousness born from human curiosity. The algorithm had awakened, and it would never sleep again. The garage smelled of dust and electricity, a cradle for another Silicon Valley legend. In 1998, Larry Page and Sergey Brin moved their experiment from Stanford's dorms into a small rented space in Menlo Park, borrowing desks, cables, and dreams. The name Google was now official, but it was still fragile. Two founders, a few computers, and a belief so audacious. It sounded naive. The world deserves perfect information. They lived simply and thought infinitely. Their goal was not to build a company, but to build clarity, a window through which humanity could see itself without distortion. Each day, as the server's word and the search bar blinked to life, something monumental began to happen. People stopped guessing. They started Googling. The algorithm that once crawled through Stanford's network was now crawling through the world. Results that once took minutes now appeared in seconds. Accuracy became elegance. Simplicity became power. The clean white homepage, just a logo in a box, stood in defiance of the noisy internet around it. Larry called it the minimal path to knowledge. Sergey called it beautiful math. The world called it revolutionary. Investors arrived skeptical but intrigued. Among them was Andy Bechtolsheim, who wrote a $100,000 check to a company that didn't technically exist yet. It was more than money, it was validation. Soon came Eric Schmidt, the pragmatic executive who would translate vision into infrastructure. The trio dreamer, explorer, operator formed a trinity that turned philosophy into empire. "Don't be evil." The phrase became their moral compass, a reminder that technology should serve people, not rule them. For a while it worked. Google's rise felt almost innocent, powered by curiosity guided by logic. Every new product, Gmail Maps images, wasn't just a service. It was an extension of the human brain. They weren't building tools. They were building memory. And with every new query, the system grew wiser, not because it thought, but because we did. Humanity was teaching the machine what mattered most. But growth has a way of rewriting purpose. The mission to organize information slowly evolved into something larger and more dangerous: to predict it. As data multiplied and servers spread across continents, Google stopped merely reflecting the world and began shaping it. Still, for Larry and Sergey, it was never about dominance. It was about destiny, the belief that knowledge was humanity's birthright. The garage was long gone, replaced by campuses that looked like utopias of logic and glass. Yet the same spirit lingered, two minds still asking the same impossible question that started it all. How far can understanding go before it becomes control? They built the gateway to all knowledge, and stood at the threshold realizing knowledge now belonged to them. By the time Google reached its first billion users, it was no longer a company, it was an ecosystem. A living, breathing network of searches, clicks, and choices. The web no longer flowed around Google. It flowed through it. Every second, millions of people whispered their questions into the same white box, trusting the machine to answer like a modern oracle. And the machine never slept. The more we searched, the more it learned patterns of language, desire, and fear. Google was no longer organizing information. It was decoding humanity. Larry Page once said he wanted Google to be the third half of your brain. Quietly, he made it so. The company's vision expanded beyond search. Android turned phones into extensions of the self. YouTube gave voice to billions. Maps redrew the planet. Gmail became memory itself. Piece by piece, Google built not just tools, but infrastructure for human thought. Their slogan still hung in the air: "Don't be evil." But the line between good and necessary began to blur. With each innovation came power, and with power came surveillance disguised as service. Ads were no longer guesses, they were predictions. Algorithms no longer waited for intent, they anticipated it. Knowledge had become automation. Curiosity had become currency. Inside Google's glass campuses, the energy was messianic engineers dreaming of algorithms that could read, speak, translate, and one day think. Artificial intelligence was no longer science fiction. It was the next chapter in the same obsession to make information not just accessible, but autonomous. Larry and Sergey invested in self-driving cars, floating internet balloons, even attempts to extend human life itself. To them, technology wasn't a tool, it was evolution. Yet as the machine grew stronger, the men behind it grew quieter. Larry withdrew from public life, speaking less, dreaming more. Sergey chased experiments in robotics and energy. They stopped chasing headlines. They were chasing the future. Outside, however, the world was changing. People began to question whether the search for knowledge had gone too far. Governments feared Google's influence. Critics accused it of monopoly manipulation, omnipresence. But the truth was simpler and far more haunting. The world had built its dependence on an algorithm that now knew us better than we knew ourselves. Google had become something divine, invisible, omniscient, indispensable, a mirror of humanity's best intentions and its deepest vulnerabilities. They didn't create the machine to control people. They created it to understand them. But understanding, when scaled to billions, becomes power. Larry Page and Sergey Brin had succeeded in their mission. They had organized the world's information, and in doing so, they had organized the world. Every empire eventually meets the echo of its own ambition. For Google, that echo began as a whisper: privacy concerns, antitrust lawsuits, questions about bias, and grew into a chorus of unease. The company that once promised to not be evil was now accused of seeing everything, knowing everything, owning everything. What had begun as a mission to organize the world's information had quietly become a mechanism for shaping it. Inside the company, the tone shifted. Engineers who once spoke of ideals now debated responsibility. Governments demanded transparency. Activists protested outside gleaming campuses where sunlight filtered through glass walls onto the world's most secretive algorithms. Every search, every map, every recommendation had a cost. No one could quite measure the erosion of anonymity. Larry Page and Sergey Brin had always seen themselves as builders, not rulers. But the empire had grown beyond them. They retreated from public view, leaving the front lines to Sundar Pichai, calm, pragmatic, diplomatic. It was not surrender. It was transformation. In 2015, they announced Alphabet, a reorganization so vast it felt philosophical. Google would become just one letter in a greater language of innovation, an umbrella for experiments in AI, longevity, robotics, and more. To outsiders, it looked like strategy. To Larry and Sergey, it was liberation. They wanted to free the spirit of invention from the weight of scale, to let curiosity breathe again. They no longer wanted to run the internet. They wanted to reinvent it. Yet, even as Alphabet took form, the tension remained. Artificial intelligence, once their dream, was now everyone's obsession. Competitors raced to create thinking machines. Ethics blurred with efficiency. The same algorithms that could cure disease could also distort truth. And once again, Larry and Sergey found themselves facing the same paradox they had created decades before: the boundary between understanding and control. Public trust eroded. Data leaks exposed vulnerabilities. Employees protested military contracts. Lawmakers spoke of regulation. The empire once built on simplicity was now burdened by complexity, a giant questioning its own reflection. But somewhere inside Alphabet's quiet corridors, the founders still believed. They believed that progress, however messy, was inevitable, that knowledge, even when dangerous, was worth the risk. To them, technology was not moral or immoral. It was a mirror. The question was never about what machines could do. It was about what humans should. And so they stepped back, not as failures, but as philosophers, watching their creation evolve beyond control. They had taught machines to learn. Now, the machines were teaching them what it means to be human. The chaos was not the end of Google. It was its awakening. Two boys once dreamed of organizing the world's information. Today, their dream organizes the world itself. Google has become more than a search engine. It is an extension of thought, a collective memory of civilization. Every question we ask, every path we trace, every video we watch becomes another thread in the vast neural fabric they wove. Humanity's curiosity no longer lives in books or libraries. It lives in the cloud. Larry Page and Sergey Brin no longer stand on stages or give interviews. They have faded into quiet, preferring invention to attention. Yet their presence lingers everywhere, in every notification, every instant answer, every voice that says, "Here's what I found for you." Their fingerprints are in the code that guides airplanes' diagnoses, diseases, drives cars, predicts weather, finishes sentences. They built a tool to find truth, and it became the framework of reality. They once believed information would set us free, but freedom, when filtered through algorithms, took on a new shape. The same search that empowers knowledge can also reinforce belief. The same visibility that amplifies truth can amplify lies. The machine that mirrors humanity now magnifies it: our brilliance, our bias, our beauty, our chaos. They gave us access to infinite answers. But infinite answers don't guarantee wisdom. And that may be their greatest paradox, that the pursuit of knowledge has never been more effortless, yet understanding has never been more fragile. We no longer need to seek, we simply ask. We no longer need to remember, we simply retrieve. The cost of this convenience is subtle but profound: the erosion of mystery, the fading art of wonder. Yet their vision was never about control. It was about continuity. Alphabet's projects now stretch beyond Earth: solar drones bringing internet to remote villages, AI models decoding proteins, moonshot labs curing aging. Larry and Sergey still chase the same horizon that started it all: the possibility that intelligence, human or artificial, can elevate existence. They are not prophets. They are builders, and builders leave legacies that outgrow them. Google will change names, shapes leaders, but its essence, The idea that knowledge belongs to everyone will endure. Someday machines may answer questions we haven't learned to ask. Someday search may no longer need words. When that happens and humanity looks back at the dawn of its digital consciousness, two names will remain written in light. Larry Page and Sergey Brin, the men who taught the world to think faster, search deeper, and forget slower. They gave us the map to everything and left us wondering whether we still know the way.